Morning, January 5th, 1943, south of Cape Hunter. The sea was calm, the sky washed in pale light, and the cruiser USS Helena was settling back into routine after a night of bombarding Japanese positions. Nobody on deck expected anything unusual, yet within seconds, the crew would witness a detonation in the sky that made no sense. An explosion that happened without impact, without a visible hit, and without any explanation. They stared upward, trying to understand how a shell could burst in midair and tear apart a bomber that was already fleeing. None of them knew it yet, but they had just seen the first combat use of a technology that would quietly alter the entire course of the war. Long before that morning, the Navy had been battling a problem no commander could ignore. Anti-aircraft fire barely worked. At Pearl Harbor, thousands of rounds were fired, yet aircraft slipped through untouched. Timed fuses set to explode at estimated altitudes burst harmlessly in empty air. Contact shells needed a direct hit, something almost nobody could achieve against a fast-moving plane while the firing ship rolled beneath their feet. At Munda, Coral Sea, Midway, the pattern repeated. Endless gunfire, almost no results. Men like John England died while shells exploded hundreds of feet above where attackers actually flew. The flaw was simple and brutal. Gunners could not force physics to cooperate. They could only hope their calculations were correct, and hope rarely saved ships. But somewhere far from the Pacific, in a quiet Washington building, a team refused to accept that the problem was unsolvable. At the center of it all was Merle Tuve, a physicist who had already earned a reputation for tackling problems most people avoided. When asked to create a fuse that could sense its distance from a target and detonate at the perfect moment, engineers warned him it couldn't be done. A shell endured 20,000 GS at launch, enough force to shatter delicate electronics instantly. The needed components simply didn't exist. Tuve's team disagreed. Instead of starting with limitations, they started with possibilities, sketching designs that sounded closer to science fiction than battlefield equipment. Their concept was bold, a miniature radio transmitter that would bounce a signal off a target. As the shell closed in, the reflection changed through Doppler shift. When the frequency hit a specific threshold, the fuse would detonate. Elegant in theory, ridiculous in practice, unless they could build electronics small enough, tough enough, and simple enough to survive both manufacturing and combat. They began crafting vacuum tubes the size of a thumb, reinforced with thicker glass and tiny shock-absorbing supports. They invented a battery that activated only when fired, the shock breaking a sealed vial and releasing electrolyte. They stripped the antenna down until the brass casing of the fuse became the radiator. Piece by piece, the fuse evolved from impossible idea to a palm-sized miracle. Still, no one outside the project was allowed to know the details. Workers soldered components under bright lights without understanding the purpose. Armed guards watched over factories. Even the Navy's own officers received only vague explanations. The project's secrecy rivaled atomic research. Yet results in testing were too promising to ignore. At Dahlgren and Chesapeake Bay, shells began detonating at precisely the right distance from test targets. Then came the USS Cleveland trials. 3 drones destroyed with 4 shots. Observers stood speechless. This was not an incremental improvement. This was a leap forward so dramatic that planners canceled further testing. They didn't need more data. The weapon already worked better than anything they had ever seen. Once production reached a few thousand units, they were sent across the Pacific under heavy guard. The Helena received 500 rounds, each one humming faintly with hidden circuitry. Her captain was warned. No firing near land. No revealing the secret. Report everything. Commander D. Parsons boarded specifically to watch the first combat use. On that January morning, when 4 Japanese dive bombers streaked away from the task force at low altitude, he understood instantly. This was the perfect moment. Conventional shells would accomplish nothing. He authorized Helena's aft battery to load the new rounds. The first salvo roared out and fell behind. The second burst in empty water. The third changed history. A shell detonated 30 feet from a fleeing bomber with no contact, no timed setting, and no visible reason. The blast tore the aircraft apart. The crew stood frozen, not celebrating at first, because they didn't understand what they had seen. It felt like witnessing a trick of physics, something they weren't prepared to explain. But Parsons knew. The unproven weapon had done exactly what it was built to do, and from that moment forward, nothing about naval defense would ever be the same. The spread of the new fuse was immediate and unstoppable. Enterprise and Saratoga fired them at incoming torpedo bombers and watched their kill rates climb to levels previously considered unattainable. Shells weren't guessing anymore, they were reacting. Aircraft jinking, diving, or climbing could no longer escape through luck or miscalculation. By mid-1943, ships demanded more ammunition than factories could supply. Production soared from hundreds per day to tens of thousands. And still, it wasn't enough to satisfy frontline needs. Then came Okinawa, where the true value of the technology appeared in terrifying clarity. Kamikaze pilots hurled themselves into American ships with devastating accuracy. But proximity-fused shells created lethal bursts far beyond the reach of timed fuses. The destroyer USS Helena faced 156 attackers in 90 minutes. With older ammunition, she likely would have been lost within half an hour. Instead, she survived the onslaught after downing wave after wave of incoming aircraft. Her captain later credited the fuse with saving his crew, saying bluntly that no other weapon could have kept them alive. While American ships were surviving because of the new technology, Germany stumbled into one of the most astonishing miscalculations of the war. During the Battle of the Bulge, German forces captured 20,000 American fuses intact. Engineers examined them carefully, saw the radio tubes, the circuits, the unusual battery, and concluded they must be non-functional prototypes or decoys. Their calculations insisted vacuum tubes couldn't survive gun launch. So when they found tubes that clearly had survived, they dismissed the evidence right in front of them. For 72 hours, they had access to the most advanced fuse in the world, and they never fired a single one. The mistake allowed Allied artillery to hammer German forces with terrifying accuracy. Soldiers reported shells bursting overhead, even in deep trenches. Panic spread. Rumors circulated that the Americans had developed a new kind of invisible guidance. Back in Britain, the same technology became a shield against the V-1 rockets terrorizing London. Early attempts shot down only a fraction of the incoming missiles. But once the new fuses arrived, the intercept rate climbed above 75%, and on some days over 80%. Churchill later said the device helped save London from devastation that might have forced mass evacuations. Yet the people who built the heart of the weapon, the workers soldering wires, assembling tiny parts, and passing through daily searches, had no idea what they were creating. Only after the war did they learn their effort had protected ships, cities, and entire divisions of troops. Many cried when they finally understood. Some said it was the first time in their lives they felt true pride in their work. They had spent years building the most advanced electronic weapon of its era without ever knowing its purpose. The man behind the breakthrough never sought attention. Merle Tuve returned quietly to academic research, speaking little about the project that had reshaped warfare. He estimated the fuse saved tens of thousands of lives, perhaps far more, but he rarely speculated. He didn't need numbers to understand its impact. The shells worked. They protected sailors. They stopped attacks that would have killed thousands. That was enough for him. In the end, the proximity fuse changed the war not just because it was brilliant technology, but because a team refused to accept limits. While others insisted the problem could not be solved, they solved it. While German engineers declared the concept impossible, American crews were firing it in combat. The difference came down to one simple belief. The line between impossible and possible isn't fixed. It moves every time someone refuses to stop pushing.